It was the small gesture that caught his eye. In a crowded, noisy diner where the world seemed to be moving in fast forward, she was completely still. An elderly woman, her hands wrapped around a simple cup of tea, staring not at a phone, but out the rain-streaked window. And on her plate, nothing but a single, untouched dinner roll. Something about that stillness, that quiet loneliness in the middle of all that chaos, made Alex's heart pause for just a moment. He watched as the waitress approached her table, not with more food, but with the check. He saw the woman's shoulders tense, then slump. She opened a small, worn coin purse, peering inside with a look of quiet resignation. It was a look Alex had seen before, on his own mother's face, years ago. Without another thought, he raised his hand and caught the waitress's eye. "Excuse me," he said softly. Could I take care of her bill? Please, just tell her it's taken care of." Alex was 28, a man who believed his life was fairly ordinary. He had a good job as a graphic designer, a small apartment he was proud of, and a loving, adoptive family who had given him everything. Yet there was a quiet space in his heart, a gentle, unanswered question about where he had come from. He knew he was adopted as a toddler, and while he loved his parents deeply, he sometimes wondered about the woman who had given him life. Was she out there? Did she ever think of him? The woman, whose name was Eleanor, lived a life of quiet routine. She worked part-time at a local library, her greatest joy being the children's story hour. But every Friday evening, she came to the same diner. She would order a cup of tea and a roll, using the last of her weekly treat budget. It wasn't really about the food, it was about the ritual. It was about sitting in a place full of families and laughter, pretending, just for an hour, that she wasn't alone. You see, decades ago, Eleanor had made the most painful decision of her life. As a young, struggling single mother, she had placed her 3-year-old son for adoption, believing it was the only way to give him the safety and future she couldn't provide. She had never stopped looking for him, never stopped loving him. This weekly meal was her quiet prayer. On this particular Friday, the rain was colder, her arthritis was worse, and her heart felt heavier than usual. The cost of her medication had gone up, and as she counted the few dollars in her purse, she knew she couldn't afford the tea and the roll. She would have to choose. Just as she was about to put the roll back, the kind waitress, Maria, had already put in the order. "It's okay, Eleanor," Maria had whispered. "It's on the house this week." But Eleanor had pride. No, I couldn't," she insisted, her voice frail. Their quiet back and forth was what Alex had witnessed from across the room. After Alex paid, Maria went to Eleanor's table, bending down. "Your bill has been taken care of, sweetheart," she said with a warm smile. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "By who?" Maria nodded towards Alex, who was now gathering his own coat, ready to slip out quietly. Eleanor stood up, a little unsteady. She had to thank this stranger. As she walked towards him, something familiar in the way he moved, the tilt of his head as he buttoned his coat, made her breath catch. It was a fleeting, ghostly memory. "Young man," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Alex turned, offering a gentle smile. "It was nothing, really. Please, have a good evening." "It was everything," Eleanor said, her eyes growing damp. "You have a kind heart. It reminds me of my son." The word son hung in the air between them. Alex felt a strange pull. "I'm sure he's very proud of you," he said kindly. Eleanor nodded, a tear escaping. "I haven't seen him since he was 3. I had to let him go. But I think of him every day." She fiddled with the necklace she always wore, a simple silver locket tarnished with age. Alex's eyes, almost without his command, dropped to that locket. His world seemed to slow down. He knew that locket. He had an old, faded photograph from his adoption file, a picture of a young woman holding a toddler. In that photograph, she was wearing that exact locket. His voice was barely a whisper. "That locket. Does it open?" Eleanor looked startled, her hand flying to it protectively. "Yes, it has a picture of my baby boy inside. It's all I have left." "Can I?" Alex's heart was pounding in his ears. "Can I see it?" With trembling fingers, Eleanor pried the tiny clasp open. Inside was a small, sepia-toned photograph of a little boy with a shock of dark hair and wide, curious eyes. Alex stared at it, then slowly reached for his own wallet. From a hidden compartment behind his driver's license, he pulled out an identical but more faded copy of the very same photograph. He held it out, his hand shaking. I have this picture. My parents gave it to me. They told me it was from my birth mother." For a long, silent moment, they just stared at the two identical photos. The noise of the diner faded into a distant hum. Eleanor's eyes lifted from the photo to Alex's face, truly seeing him for the first time, seeing her own eyes looking back at her, the shape of her father's jaw, the kindness she had always prayed had been passed on. "James," she breathed, using the name she had given him so long ago. "My little Jamie?" Alex, whose name was now Alex, but whose soul suddenly remembered being Jamie, could only nod, tears now streaming freely down his face. "Mom?" he choked out. They didn't embrace right away. They stood there, in the aisle of a simple diner, crying and simply looking at each other, memorizing a face they had both spent a lifetime dreaming of. Then Eleanor reached out a hand, and he took it, and she pulled him into the gentlest, most profound hug either of them had ever known. It was a hug filled with 25 years of lost birthdays, silent prayers, and an ocean of love that had never, for a single day, faded. They sat back down at her booth, talking for hours as the diner emptied around them. She told him stories of his first words, his love for blueberries, how he would laugh in his sleep. He told her about his life, his passions, the parents who had cherished him. There was no bitterness, only a miraculous, overwhelming gratitude for this moment. Alex didn't just pay for a meal that night. He paid back a debt of love he never knew was owed. And Eleanor didn't just receive charity. She received the answer to a lifetime of prayers, delivered not by an angel, but by her own son, whose first instinct upon seeing her was one of pure, unasked-for kindness. Music swells gently, then softens. Narration, reflective outro. That night, in a humble diner, a simple act of compassion became a bridge across time. Alex saw a stranger in need and reached out. He had no idea he was reaching for his own history, his own heart. And Eleanor, holding on to faith and a tiny locket, finally found the missing piece of her soul because a young man chose to be kind. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many times do we cross paths with a person whose story is forever intertwined with our own? How many times does a small gesture hold the potential for a miracle? Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to a stranger or to ourselves is simply to listen to that quiet nudge of kindness in our hearts. You never know who you might be welcoming home. Final shot visual. The two photographs side by side, then fading to a single shining locket. Share this story if it reminded you that love and family can find its way back in the most unexpected ways.